Hey, everybody, welcome back to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we discuss all things strange and spooky. And this is episode 36. I'm joined again by my frequent co hosts, Scott Perry, Josh Diaz. Thanks, guys, for coming on again. And this week, we're going to be talking about something that we've talked a lot about off air and something that was spurred by a recent episode that Scott and I had done about the Sasquatch Chronicles podcast and the controversy surrounding that. So this week we're kind of talking about belief in the paranormal and sort of faith versus fact. And because when people ask you, do you believe in Bigfoot? Do you believe in UFOs? Do you believe in ghosts? That's kind of a loaded question, because what does belief mean and what does that entail? And is that really a scientific approach? It can be a faith-based approach. And again, the reason I brought this up, we did this podcast a few weeks ago about the Sasquatch Chronicles, and I don't want to talk about this too much because it did raise a lot of controversy. But we were talking about Wes Germer's story. Wes is obviously the host of Sasquatch Chronicles, and his story had some holes in it, some very provable, factual holes in it, where he said there was a full moon that night. It was a clear sky. He gave coordinates where he said he saw these creatures, and it was proven through a report, not by us, but outside sources have proven that there was no full moon that night. It was actually very cloudy, so there was no clear skies. And his coordinates were wrong by about 10 miles. So a lot of inaccuracies. And we were just kind of discussing this on the show, and we got a lot of negative comments on the show, on the YouTube channel, on my Apple iTunes podcast. I mean, people were just sort of tearing into us, his fans, and saying, like, how dare you question his story? You guys are jealous. You guys are just trying to make a name for yourselves. And honestly, that's not what we were trying to do. We like Wes's show. We think he seems like a very nice guy. We're just objectively sort of pointing out that there are factual inaccuracies. And that's kind of where we all sort of proceed from when we discuss the paranormal, when we're interested in the paranormal. We're investigators. We're curious. We want to know things. And if you have two huge parts of your story and one of them is factually wrong, your whole story sort of falls apart. So that just got us talking about belief and the sort of level of blind faith versus people who are a little bit more meticulous and are kind of picking apart these stories. And there's kind of both ends of the spectrum, where you have like the blind faith believers on one side, and you kind of have the skeptics on the other, where a UFO could pick them up, bring them on board, probe them, fly them around Jupiter and put them back down, and they're going to say, oh, that was just swamp gas or an owl or whatever sort of stupid weather balloon, which is in the news lately, sort of stupid thing that they blame things on. So yeah, I wanted you two guys on because Josh, you and I.
Sorry,
There,
just seeing Scott's
Scott,
dog there.
Scott's co-host down there.
Yeah.
Um, so I wanted, you guys and Josh, you and I have talked a lot about religion and faith, and your approach to religion is really interesting, because I do know a lot of people who are religious, and they're kind of that blind faith variety. They never question it. It was just how they were raised, and um, the Bible is gospel, and you believe it and you never question it. And then I know some atheists. I know some people who don't believe in God. And they're just very scientific. There's no proof. There's no proof of God, so he must not exist. And then you sort of have the agnostics, which are kind of like, I don't know, because yes, there is no proof, but just, lack of proof doesn't mean lack of existence. And then you and I kind of got started on something which I want you to talk about in a little bit. A sort of logical framework for approaching these things. But before we get into that, because we're taking a deep dive tonight, we're going a little bit down the rabbit hole tonight. We're hopefully going to try to keep it simple. But I just wanted to open it up to you guys as far as belief in the paranormal, and I'm using the paranormal to encompass everything here: UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts. What are your guys' thoughts on saying I believe in this X, Y, or Z?
Want me to go first?
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead,
for it.
Scott. I don't really, it's hard if someone were to say, or ask me, you really believe in Bigfoot? Do you believe in paranormal? Do you believe? and I'll be the first to tell you, I am not religious. I'm probably in what you call that middle group. I'm not full blown atheist, but I really hope there is something for us afterwards. I really do. I won't say yes or no, but when you talk about belief, that's to me, it's more of a spiritual thing. You know, you're putting faith into a belief, right? You're talking more pixies and unicorns. Now, if like I said, it's hard for me to talk to somebody when they start the conversation. Like even my neighbors, you really believe because they'll see our Bigfoot stuff. You believe in that? Well, if you were to ask me a different way, like, is it plausible? Yes, I believe it's plausible. Um, ask me something like that, because belief is, to me, it's just the wrong type of question to ask when it comes to something like this. Uh, you know, it's plausible that this, we don't know 100% if any of this is real, but there's enough evidence out there to support that it's all plausible. I catch myself saying I believe in this or that too, but then I'll even have to take a step back and catch myself before using the B word, because that's more like you said, taking a leap of faith in something. So it's very hard, for me to carry on a conversation, with someone who wants to know my thoughts on these subjects. I, I find it easier, if they were to say, is it possible or is it plausible that these things exist, rather than to say belief? Because, like you said, my opinion is belief, hinges more on faith, like you said. And it's just I just have a hard time with that, using the word
Mhm. Yeah, I can appreciate that, Scott. My take on this, and I think this kind of helps me make that distinguishing line between what I call blind faith and reasonable faith. I think there's a distinction there. I would say blind faith is believing something like, if you were to tell me that you went outside and you just flew up in the air and, you know, jumped 15 stories up in the air and landed on the top of a building. If I were to believe you, that would be blind faith. No evidence, no nothing to support that. Reasonable faith is more where you can go ahead and take a leap of faith, be courageous, go ahead and make a statement, and believe on something based on evidence. I think that there should, and I've mentioned this in the podcast a few times, in previous podcasts, that if you're going to believe something, you should be rational to believe it. I think that there should be good reasons to believe what you believe. So for me, when it comes to faith, I think sometimes there's a confusion when I talk with other people about it, about blind faith, which is just as blind. I just believe whatever the pastor tells me. I believe whatever the imam tells me. I believe whatever the atheist or agnostic or whoever tells me. I just believe it because they're just saying it, on face value. That's blind faith to me. That is irrational. It may still be true. It could still be irrational, and it could still be true, but I don't think it's a good approach if we care about truth. So when it comes to reasonable faith, like I said, there should be reasons for why you believe something. And I think it's okay and brave and courageous to go ahead and say, I believe something about the world. I believe this certain aspect of the world, whether or not I can prove it or not. I'm rational to say there's some good evidence, and I think I do believe that, and I'm willing to change my belief at some point if proven otherwise, or if there's better evidence to suggest otherwise. We should be open to change our beliefs, and that's hard because we along with our beliefs, we have emotional attachments to our beliefs, and it can be difficult. I mean, there's been times where my beliefs have been challenged over the years. I'm telling you, it's rocked me to my core. I remember one time getting, in faith issues. And there's a lot of things we can talk about that, but I won't even go there. But there's been things that have rocked me to my core, and took 6 months for me to work through some of those issues and come out of that and still say, I still believe. I still believe. I was able to reason through that, and it wasn't finding a better argument. Is the argument that was presented to me that rocked me. How much does it stand up to a counter argument? And let's just see where it lands after some more scrutiny of that. And at the end, I ended up still maintaining belief and saying, wow, it withstood the storm, and okay, I can keep going. Now, when it comes to Bigfoot, to answer Jason's question, do I believe in Bigfoot? I will say I am agnostic on Bigfoot. I am on the fence. I think that there's enough evidence to suggest that there's something that's being seen. I think I don't disbelieve all the witnesses, but I don't believe all the stories either. So I think we have to really carefully balance that. And I'm not 100% prepared to make the full leap to saying I believe 100% in Bigfoot. I'd also need to understand what Bigfoot is. Well, how do we define Bigfoot? I mean, because we've had this discussion before. Is Bigfoot, some kind of ape-like creature? Is it just some kind of missing link? Is it spiritual? Is it some kind of thing that teleports? Or there's so many things there that just I tend to lean. If I were to make a kind of a faith leap, a little bit like a reasonable faith leap, I would say I would lean more towards it's a natural thing, and something that's just really undiscovered. There's a lot of questions that arise. I'm not close to the idea that there could be a spiritual element there. I'm not 100% close, but I'm not 100% convinced either. So I don't know. So I'm going to say I'm agnostic on it. But I love the search. I'm really enjoying this journey with you guys, and yeah, yeah. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, and it's I'm sure you've seen, just Scott and I have been in this world, I think, a lot longer than you have, as far as the paranormal side of things. But you coming from the religious side, I mean, in the paranormal community, there's a lot of this blind faith, and I think this is really what sort of irks all three of us when we see it. And we've talked about this in the past too. It's not just Wes's story where they're saying, oh, well, it doesn't matter if there was a full moon or not. Like, he still saw Bigfoot. And it's like, well, a major premise of the story is wrong. So why is the conclusion true if a major part of it is false? But you see this in a lot of the community where, I saw a UFO and, it had a green light and a red light and, they were blinking and that had a big white light at the center. And you're like, well, that sounds like a plane. And they have so much faith in these things, same thing with ghosts, same things with Bigfoot. They'll show you a photo of orbs. I took this photo in my attic. I was up there, looking through my boxes and I took a picture and now look, there's 37 orbs and they're all ghosts. And it's, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast that as an investigator, people send me these photos and, oh, you're the expert. Can you please tell me what this is? What did I capture here? And I say, oh, this looks like dust orbs. The flash bounces off each little piece of dust and it makes it look like a little orb in the photo. And they will yell at me and, all caps email in return, you fucking idiot. You don't know what the fuck you're talking about. You're stupid. So these are people with this blind faith that are just saying, this is a ghost. And I just want confirmation that it was a ghost. I don't really want the truth. I just want you as the expert to confirm my beliefs. And if you go against that, and I'm always very respectful, and I'll say this to me looks like dust. I don't think there's anything paranormal here. And I always use those open-ended terms, this looks like, or I think, because I'm not trying to insult anyone, people, and not everyone's like that. There are a lot of people who are just, oh, thank you. That explains it. And I feel so much better. I don't have, 37 ghosts in my attic. But you do get the people who will yell and scream and insult me. And because I've sort of, like you said, Josh, kind of shaken their faith a little bit. Whereas someone like you, you're this rational faith person and you follow logic and, you adapt. And you and I have had these discussions too, in the woods or, just on our phone calls or whatever, just how you read something or you hear some, a sermon or something, and things can sort of change your outlook. And that doesn't shake your faith. It just sort of changes the way you view things. Whereas these blind faith people, they just, no, this is definitely a ghost. No, I definitely saw a UFO. No, that was definitely Bigfoot. And there's no wiggle room there because they just have this blind faith and they don't want to deviate from that. And it's just that alone is fascinating to me, that they're just so faith driven and they don't want to see logical explanations. They don't want to hear arguments to the other side.
Yeah, and I believe the term for that is confirmation bias. It's basically where you're just looking for things that are going to confirm your bias towards anything that will confirm your belief, and you will reject things that kind of go against it.
Right. And I think I mentioned that a few weeks ago too, about like the ghost hunters. Like they'll be in a room and they'll all night, they'll, give us a sign of your presence. If you're here, please make a noise for us. And they'll ask that 27 times. And on the 27th time, oh my God, we heard a noise. That's a proof of a ghost. That's their confirmation bias. They're ignoring the 26 other times that nothing happened.
Right. Yeah.
Which is the preponderance of evidence there to say, no, there's nothing here. That was coincidental. So yeah, it's definitely confirmation bias. And again, the same people who are sending me these pictures of orbs, they're going to go to every paranormal group they can find. And, 13 of us can say, no, these are just dust orbs. But the one group that says, oh my God, you caught ghosts, they're going to go to all their friends now and say, oh, XYZ Paranormal says I got a picture of a ghost. So that's where you're kind of getting into all this faith and yeah, confirmation bias and that is faith. That is all just belief. That is, I want to believe that this is a ghost and I'm not going to listen to any other arguments. Whereas I really think, to understand these phenomena, whatever they are, we have to proceed from like a logical standpoint. And, Josh, you and I were talking the other night and you sort of brought something up that blew my mind. It was something I'd never heard about before. So maybe this is a good time for you to sort of explain it to the viewers at home.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I was, one of the things that I had brought up was we had a discussion about the supernatural and the implications of that, not just for belief, but in terms of the paranormal. Because in the paranormal, whether you're discussing aliens, UFOs, angels, demons, spirits, ghosts, or Bigfoot in the sense of a quasi-spiritual being. I mean, it is part of the discussion for Bigfoot. You have your camps of primarily a natural creature, and then you have your camps where it's kind of part spiritual. I don't know. There's some Native American beliefs that are kind of indicate some kind of spiritual things, and I've heard some other stuff that it has some abilities that are definitely paranormal. Telepathy and that kind of thing. So. At least what I would consider paranormal. So basically what I had told you about, Jason, was that there's this argument, and it's a logical argument, and it's actually really old. There's this argument for the existence of God, and it's called the cosmological argument. It's one of about 5 major arguments for the existence of God, and it's been going on for the argument first started off that I know of back in the days of like Aristotle and Plato. And it's developed since then. Over the years, other philosophers and thinkers have kind of added to it, refined it into what we have today. And there's a gentleman by the name of William Lane Craig. He's a philosopher, and he's really popularized the argument. And it's now, the more recent format of the cosmological argument is the Kalam Cosmological Argument. And basically that the word Kalam is, it traces back to a form of theology that's Islamic. Actually, there was a guy, I don't know, hundreds of years ago, an Islamic guy that kind of really made some good contributions to the argument. And so William Lane Craig, the modern day philosopher, he termed it the Kalam Cosmological Argument. And it's very simple. And what I'm going to do, Jason, can I share my screen or?
Yeah. All right. So we got Josh to be able to share his screen. So Josh, you can continue now.
Okay. So so hopefully everybody can see my little Word doc. I whipped this together this afternoon, and hopefully it makes sense. And I'm going very basic with this because it can get very, very complex, and you can go down a rabbit hole with philosophy and logic and that kind of thing. But I'm just going to kind of briefly define like what I mean by a logical argument. A logical argument is made up of premises, and those are statements or ideas that support a conclusion. If the premises are true, then it follows that the conclusion is also true. An argument can be viewed as a building, the conclusion being the roof and the premises being the pillars that hold up and support the roof. Makes sense, right? I gave a little pictogram or picture here to kind of illustrate my point. You know, if you want to, now here was an interesting thing, Jason. You had mentioned that in general, if premises are true, then your conclusion should also be true. That would make a sound argument, a valid and sound argument. But there are times where you can have a right conclusion and your premises are all wrong. But you know, you can shoot in the dark and get it right, and all your other facts are wrong. But in general, when we're trying to be as logical as possible and trying to be rational, we want to have premises that support our conclusion. And science is based around this kind of idea as well. The scientific method, you know, you put your theory out there, what you want to prove to be true, and then you support it with supportive data. So premises are those areas where you'd put supportive data. Now, here's the Kalam cosmological argument that's taken thousands of years to be refined, and here it is. Okay, the first premise is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. Now, I'm just going to go through this real fast, and then I'll explain it. So, Scott, I know philosophy really isn't your thing, but I'll try to keep it simple. But the first premise is that everything that begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. 3, now this is the conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. And so here I did my little pictogram here. The conclusion that the universe has a cause is supported by premise 1 and premise 2. Everything that begins to exist has a cause. And premise 2 is the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. Now, this seems really basic, but it's a very hard-hitting point. And I'm going to get into it real quick. Okay, moving on. Now, this is how the premises get supported here, right? So the first premise, now if the premises are true, guys, then it logically follows that the conclusion is true as well. So keep that in mind. The first premise, everything that begins to exist has a cause. And we had talked about this before, Jason. Cause and effect, or causality, it's scientifically demonstrable. They're demonstrable statements on the relationships between one or more things. So for example, if I were to say everything that exists has a cause, right? Look at your cell phone. It exists, right? It began to exist at one point. You can demonstrate that it has a cause. And you're rational to believe that it has a cause, that something caused your cell phone to exist. The glasses that both of you are wearing right now, somebody put those together. You're rational to believe that, right? You wouldn't be irrational to believe that. You're rational to believe that the glasses that you're wearing, the shirt that you're wearing, there's a cause behind it. So everything this is a demonstrable, it's demonstrable scientifically and experientially. So everything that begins to exist has a cause. The second premise is that the universe began to exist. Now, for a long time, this is super important to the paranormal, so pay attention to this one. For many years, scientists believed that the universe always existed or was eternal. That was a prevailing scientific view of the universe, that it always has been here. But just in the last century or so, this idea has been rejected pretty much by mainstream scientists in favor of the universe having a beginning. And one of the major milestones of accepting the fact that the universe has a beginning is the fact that when the Hubble Space Telescope, before, when we used telescopes here on Earth, we used them on just on the ground, on mountains. There's always you try to find a place that had less light pollution, less clouds, so you could get as far of a view as possible. And it wasn't until the Hubble Space Telescope that was pretty much launched into orbit that we were beyond. We were farther out, and we could take a greater look into the universe, more so than we had ever in times past been able to see. And what Hubble found was astounding, because it blew a hole in the idea that the universe was eternal. basically what Hubble was able to show was that the universe is expanding, and that's confirmed. So if the universe is expanding, and this is pretty simple to imagine the universe is expanding out. If you were to reel back the wheel of time and go back in time, it would go back to a single point in history. And we're logical, we're rational and logical to believe that. If something expanding out, right? Like if you drop something into, if you drop a quarter into a pool, and the ripples go out from where the quarter hit, if you reverse time, it would go right back to where the quarter hit. So does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Scott, how am I doing here? Is this making sense? Okay. Okay. So the universe began to exist. We can confirm this through Hubble. There's also the fact that the universe is running down. Oops, sorry. Let me go back. The universe is running down, and if the universe is running down, then it must have started at some point. And the second law of thermodynamics states that the universe is running out of usable energy. Kind of like a fire. If you make a fire, right, you throw a bunch of logs on there, you get it burning, and as it starts to burn down, you run out of that energy. Well, that energy came from somewhere, and now that energy source is gone. So you can imply that the fire had a beginning. The fire itself came from something. We also have the cosmic background radiation, which is also called the CBR. And this is basically, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this, but the first time I heard of this was in my astronomy class, but it's basically thought to be the heat afterglow from the Big Bang. And it shows that the universe wasn't always in a steady state, but had a dynamic beginning. It's basically just a residue of the Big Bang that's measurable, like you can see it, it's there. And it's pretty hard-hitting evidence for the idea that the universe had a beginning and it was not eternal. And then Albert Einstein's theory of relativity proved that the universe is not a cause, but it's actually one big effect. So what you're seeing is the effect of something. So what we see in the universe is one just giant effect.
Mm-hmm.
So those are some scientific facts, some scientific observations that support the first two premises, and they're pretty hard hitting. And our viewers are welcome to kind of pick at that if you'd like, but these are some pretty well established scientific facts that support and validate the first two premises. We have the everything that begins to exist has a cause. We know that through cause and effect. That's demonstrable. We also have the universe began to exist. We know that through Hubble and through other processes here. And so we can logically conclude that the universe has a cause. Something caused the universe, and we're rational to believe that. Now, this is where, hopefully you guys are still following me here, but this is where it gets interesting, right? So a lot of people will say that this first cause is God. And here's why. If the effects of the universe coming into existence, we look at what we see in nature, right? We see space, we see time, we see matter, we see dynamic processes, we see massively exploding processes like on the sun. And there's a lot of crazy nuclear explosions going on in the universe. So if the effects of the universe coming into existence have those things, then whatever the first cause was would naturally transcend those things. So it would transcend time, space, and matter, and would also be enormously powerful. And the first cause would also have to be intelligent, because what do we see in nature? We see all kinds of things, like we see math, we see laws of physics, laws of gravity, those kinds of things, laws of thermodynamics, very precise laws that are just there. And they're extremely precise and fine-tuned, so much so that it's rational to believe that an intelligence was the cause of those effects, not some random cause. Hopefully you guys are following me so far.
Yeah, definitely.
Now, I wanted to make a quick note. Because the Kalam Cosmological Argument is an argument for the existence of God, right? But I want to be careful here that I'm not just doing a God of the gaps argument. And Jason and Scott, I think we've talked about a God of the gaps argument before, but the God of the gaps argument is basically one where we fill in the gaps of our knowledge with the statement, we can't explain it, so therefore God did it, right? People have been doing that for millennia. People used to sincerely believe that Zeus threw lightning bolts down off Mount Olympus. We now understand that lightning bolts are the result of electrostatic discharges in the atmosphere. We no longer think we no longer need to invoke Zeus as an explanation. As we begin to fill in the gaps of our knowledge with scientific observations, we find it harder and harder to use God did it as a catch-all explanation. So I want to be careful here that when I present this argument, that I'm not making a God of the gaps argument. I'm actually making an argument that has scientific basis. So when I make the claim that God is a good placeholder for what caused the universe, it's not a God of the gaps argument. It's actually using a rational, reasonable explanation as to why I think this way. And then some people believe that the first cause is what we call God. So why is God a good definition or placeholder for the first cause? And why can we imply this without falling into a poor God of the gaps argument? Because God, by most accepted definitions, meets all of the properties mentioned above. God is by definition eternal, right? So he's timeless. Somebody could say, well, who created God? Well, the answer to that is God, by definition, is eternal, which means no beginning and no end. So if that's the case, God always existed. Nobody made God. If for something to be made or created, it couldn't by definition be eternal. Does that make sense? So if somebody says, who made God? Well, if you're saying, it's almost like comparing apples and oranges. God, by definition, almost every definition I've ever heard about God is an eternal being, like not created, something that exists outside time and space, right? So if he's eternal, then he couldn't have been made, because making something is something that's stuck in time. If I say I'm making something or I made something, that's a time bound statement. Anyway, hopefully people are still with me here. Also, God, by most accepted definitions, is not only timeless, but spaceless and immaterial. In other words, spiritual, right? God, by most accepted definitions, is all powerful. God, by most accepted definition, is not only highly intelligent, but all knowing. Therefore, God is a rational and reasonable placeholder for the first cause. Oops. Okay, hold on. Whoa. Okay. Now, how does this tie into the discussion of the paranormal? Well, if we can logically show that it's reasonable to believe in a first cause that exists outside of nature, like spiritually, then it stands to reason that we're also rational to accept that ghosts, spirits, angels, demons, and other strange, spooky stuff might also exist. Does that make sense? Yeah. Because if I can show you guys logically, if I can use this logical argument for the existence of God, if we can show logically that it's rational to believe that God exists and that God is spiritual, then it opens the door for us to accept other spiritual things. So when we have a conversation on demons, angels, ghosts, shadow people, whatever, we're rational to accept that those things could possibly exist because we have a rational argument to say that something spiritual exists. Does that make sense? Yeah. Probably getting a lot of blank stares from our viewers.
You were so worried that I wasn't going to get any of it.
Hopefully you're getting this.
Are you still with me, Scott? Are you still with me?
Yeah. Hopefully you guys are following, and there'll be a quiz at the end of the podcast. So also, if there are things that are currently unexplained that are preternatural, and this is kind of what Jason and you were talking about. Maybe I'll just kind of, I'll go ahead and say this. So if there are things that are currently unexplained that are preternatural, that by their discovery then makes them part of the natural world, then they wouldn't be by definition supernatural. Because Jason, you were talking about, like, if we find something, we find an explanation for ghosts, then it's no longer a spiritual explanation. It's just part of the natural world, right? Like we were kind of talking about that.
Yeah, like for example, say like quartz crystals capture energy, from human beings, and it's just if someone's on a battlefield and they die and they're in agony, the quartz crystal takes it and then replays it back at a later date. That is maybe something we don't understand. And I'm not saying that's the cause of ghosts. I'm just throwing an example out there. But if that, say that turns out to be the case, that is a preternatural thing right now. It's not supernatural. It's just something that is completely natural that we don't understand yet. And an example I like to use is like magnetism. You go back 1,000 years or however long, people didn't understand what magnetism was. They just had these rocks that would pull metal and, an unseen force. And they didn't understand, positive particles and negatively charged particles and how that all operated. It's a magic rock.
Right.
But once we learned what magnets were, now it just becomes part of the natural world. It's not supernatural. It's not magic. It's not supernatural. It's not the the devil at work. It's just, it's ions and protons and,
we have a rational natural explanation for that. So therefore a supernatural explanation is no longer needed. It's kind of like the God of the gaps. Now we can eliminate some of those things because science explains those. And that's good. People of faith should accept that. And the last part here, and then I'll move on to whatever we want to discuss, but if we're reasonable to believe that the spiritual exists, right? We have the Kalam Cosmological Argument, which is an argument for God. It's a rational argument. It's a valid argument. It flows from the premises, and it's a sound, and the conclusion is sound. So it's therefore, in my opinion, it's completely rational to believe that God exists. And if you believe God exists, then therefore you should be able to believe that spiritual things exist. It's a natural corollary of believing that God exists. So the Kalam argument is a great argument for the existence of God that can help you have a rational framework to believe that not only God exists, but also the spiritual realm exists, and we're able to posit all kinds of things at this point. So we're rational at this point to believe that in a spiritual world. And then there's also the aspect of if we can believe that supernatural things exist, then we can also reason that when a being such as this manifests itself in nature, it does not necessarily become part of the natural world just because it manifested, right? So there will be a difference between something that's like preternatural. Okay, we found something out and there's a natural explanation. Therefore, this thing can be fully explained within a naturalistic framework. We don't necessarily, when it comes to spiritual things, that's not the case, because I would argue that it doesn't become part of the natural world. That just because a spiritual being manifests itself in the natural world, it does not then automatically make it part of the natural order, but rather that this being would then retain the nature and essence of what it actually is and where it came from. So if something from the spirit world manifests in the natural world, it's still a spirit being. It doesn't therefore become a natural thing that we can just explain and say it's not, now it's scientific. No, it's still a spiritual explanation. It still has its origins. It still has its essence. What it is from a spiritual realm. It just has the ability to manifest itself in this realm without losing its identity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But
okay, I'm done with my screen share, so I'll
okay.
go back to. All right. Thanks everyone for bearing with me on that.
No, that was awesome. I mean, and it left. I mean, as any good presentation should, it leaves you with as many questions as there is answers.
Mm.
So, I mean, without going on a religious tirade here, and you can nip it off. I mean, like the question now, you talk about the spiritual realm. Is there one spiritual realm?
The Kalam,
heaven and hell.
Okay, so the Kalam cosmological. So I should clarify. The Kalam cosmological argument is only an argument for the existence of God. It gives us a rational framework for us to accept that there could be a spiritual realm. It makes no claims as to what God is. It could be Buddha, Allah. It could be a squirrel outside. it's not making any kind of claim to that, but it is saying that it's reasonable to believe that there's an all-powerful, timeless, spaceless, immaterial being that's intelligent, that is behind what we see, that is the cause of what we see in the material universe. The material universe is an effect of this cause. What we're living in an effect.
Right. And that's like my next question would have been, when you're talking about God, is it a God or the God?
Now, here's the thing. It doesn't make a claim to that. It could be multiple gods. It could be 1,000 gods. But the reality is that whatever it is timeless, spaceless, immaterial, all powerful.
And see, Josh,
some would argue it's
I'm sorry. I like your terminology here. That you're saying like this theory just sort of or this framework basically just says it is reasonable to believe. It doesn't say this is proof of God. Right. Which I really like, that it's not saying, we have these premises and they're both true, so therefore God exists. You're just saying it opens the door for the possibility of the existence of God, because you're saying if premise 1 is true and if premise 2 is true, then there must be some greater power. And on earth here as human beings, whatever religion you are, it is God, it is Allah, it is Buddha, it is whatever your culture, your religion, your beliefs will label that. And Josh, Scott brings up a point too. Like, is it one God? Is it many? I don't think the Kalam, is sort of saying,
it's not trying to make that argument. Yeah.
It's not trying to make that argument. It's just making the argument that if these things are true, that opens the door to the possibility of a greater power, which here on earth we would call God. And maybe it's something we, you think of God, you think of the guy up in the clouds and he's got the long white beard, or, whatever your religion is, you're thinking, you have your image of God. But God can simply be a word for this greater power. Is it a being? It could be something we just can't even comprehend, that we can't even imagine. But it does open that possibility to something, like you said, timeless, eternal, spaceless, immaterial, eternal, and just something caused the universe. What caused the universe?
Right. And until we have a better placeholder, it's rational to posit God, because all of our definitions, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm best at Christianity and maybe Judaism, some Islam. I don't know what all the religions of the world believe. I'm sure there's a lot, and there's a lot of offshoots of every religion that I could think of, even in Christianity, 1,000 different, denominations and stuff. But I think at the end of the day, I think we can all agree that God as a concept, as an idea, is this all-powerful, all-knowing, an eternal being, and he wouldn't be all-powerful, all-knowing if he wasn't eternal. If he had a beginning, if he wasn't eternal, then he probably wouldn't be as cool, probably wouldn't be as powerful, But anyway,
but here's the I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit of echo here, but the great thing about this too is that even if you say God is not eternal, if God created the universe but something created God, you can still use this to sort of say, okay, well, if God has a beginning and God created the universe, who created God? You can keep just going back with it.
It becomes an infinite regress. But what happens is what happens is then we have to define terms, because if I'm saying in my mind, and I think most religions would say, is that God is eternal. So the very nature of something that's eternal, that eternal means there's no beginning and no end, right? So if something had a beginning, then it would be stuck in time, right? Time is the word beginning is correlates with time. So if what we're calling God is eternal, then therefore there is no anything that's made, right? Anything, that's why the Kalam argument, the first premise is anything that begins to exist has a cause, right? So God, being eternal, wouldn't begin to exist. So he's not defined by premise 1. Right. He's not defined as something that is made. You could argue that something made God, but then you'd have to say, kind of like what Scott was saying, maybe a little lowercase God, or maybe some of the you have Zeus and maybe some of the lesser gods or something. If you want to, posit that, you could say, well, Zeus is the only one that's eternal. All these other gods are, but then again, they really don't fit that definition. The definition of God typically is something that is all powerful, all knowing, spiritual, and eternal. So that at least within a Christian framework, within a Judaic framework, from an Islamic framework, all those ideas of God, the eternal definition of God makes sense. I'm not sure about like what's the main religions in like Hindu religions. I'm not 100% sure. I know they have a lot of gods. I've heard it, but I'm don't quote me. But I've heard there's like 1 million gods in Hinduism. But I don't know. So I don't know the properties or the traits of those gods, but the properties of the God that I'm familiar with, and mostly in the Western world, and in Islam as well, which goes off to the east as well. Majority of what we agree as God would be someone that's eternal. I don't think a Muslim or a Jew would disagree with me that what we generally tend to define God as is someone that's eternal, therefore uncreated. Just the definition of eternal means uncreated, always existed. If he was created, then he was created in a moment of time. So, but yeah, so that's a long answer to your question there, Scott. But yeah, it gives us a framework to kind of explore these questions. Gives us a framework to believe in things that are supernatural. It's okay to believe in something that's supernatural. It's okay to take a leap of faith, because this isn't a blind leap of faith. This is actually a rational leap of faith, and I'm willing to debate on it, in the chats or whatever, or just have the discussion, or if you guys have the discussion at home with your friends, whoever's listening, look at the premises. They're just two simple premises, but they're hard hitting, and there's science to back it. And there may be arguments, that could contend with it, and that's fine. I'm open to looking at those, but it's a good rational argument for the existence of God, and it's one of like 5 that I'm aware of. That's one of them.
Nowadays, you got to just be careful of one thing, how you phrase that. You've referenced God as he,
yep,
which I guess could be he, she, or it in the world we live in now. So is it, a gender neutral God, just a being, a disembodied, boy, I don't even know what to call.
Yeah. The Kalam argument doesn't get into gender either.
No, but I mean, somewhere out there is just by you, referencing he, that's going to be, you're going to get, that's going to come up.
Yeah. And I'm open to that.
That's going to come up. I mean, you got to be ready for that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Like I'm okay with giving my because see, the Kalam argument isn't the only argument that I use when I present what I believe. There's other arguments, and then you also have to look, if you're going to believe something. Let's say it's a religion. Is a religion, if it's true, it should be rooted in history, right? There should be historical evidences as well, which you can trace some of these religions. There is historical evidences. Whether you believe in the theological implications of those evidences is another story. But I'm okay with making a claim that God is a he. I'm okay with that because the Kalam gives me a framework to believe that the God that I believe in is a he, that made people. And I'm okay believing that because I have, the Kalam allows me to be able to explore that. And not only that, but there's other arguments that are available. And there's also, historical things and other, there's all kinds of other arguments that we could have and other talks.
Yeah, I didn't mean
we'd be here all day. We'd be here for
that
3
particular
weeks.
rabbit hole, but I just, just knowing how things are today, someone would definitely pick up on the fact that you use he more than once.
Yeah.
But just, I don't have a problem saying she either. I mean, it doesn't, whatever makes you.
I wouldn't have a problem with you using that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have a problem with you using that, just like I wouldn't expect anybody to have a problem. That's my faith tradition, and it's not just a tradition. It's my belief.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm okay with using that. If somebody wants to, discuss and say, I believe it's an it or she or whatever, totally fine with that.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So to tie this all back into the paranormal, because I think that's, really where the crux of this is, and you can, or the spiritual, because God is spiritual, and, I think by definition, you can say God is, would fall into the paranormal, above the normal, just something we don't understand, and spiritual. And when you say paranormal, you're usually thinking of ghosts and spirits. And, I think if you believe in ghosts, you believe in an afterlife for the most part. Most people believe that ghosts are the souls of people who have passed. And if that's the case, then you believe in an afterlife, and you probably believe in God in some form. So yeah, I think it all kind of ties together, because if you believe in ghosts, if you believe in extraterrestrial life, if you believe in Bigfoot, and you have this argument where you're making logical leaps, and I think that's a better place to come from when you're looking at these phenomena, than to just say, I believe in Bigfoot, and every picture I see has Bigfoot in it, and everything, every snapped branch in the woods is from Bigfoot. That's a belief, but you can have your beliefs, and you can also have your logical rationale behind it to sort of say, this is why. And Scott phrased it really well at the beginning of the episode. I forget exactly how he phrased it, but just open to the possibility, or I believe in the
It's plausible.
plausibility. Thank you.
Yeah.
Plausible.
Mhm.
That I believe it's plausible. And so that's not, you're not saying I believe in Bigfoot. You're saying, yes, I am open to the possibility that it is plausible.
Exactly.
I am open to the possibility that aliens are visiting us, or interdimensional beings are visiting us, or, the souls of the departed are visiting us. You're open to that possibility. But I think it's best to proceed from a logical standpoint, to say, well, why do you believe that? And not just, every branch in the woods that's broken was done by Bigfoot. When you start doing that, that's just blind faith. And you're saying, oh, look, there's proof of Bigfoot. There's proof of, every light in the sky is a UFO. And that's not the case. And not every weird sound in your house is a ghost. So you have to, and I think, to go back to that, Josh, I think we were kind of, because we were kind of fuzzy on how we got onto this conversation, and it just hit me. We were talking about the footsteps in the matron's house. I did that episode. And we were talking about how I wasn't calling it evidence or proof, and it was just sounds. And now it's coming back to me how we got on that conversation, because it was like a week ago, but it was those footsteps. And we were sort of saying that the sound, and this is how we got into this. The sounds were created. We heard the sounds were recorded. If the sounds were created, something created them. What created them? And you could kind of track that back to, well, if it wasn't some human being, if it wasn't an animal, if it wasn't the house settling, it doesn't say that it was definitely a ghost, but it opens up that possibility.
Right. And that's kind of where the Kalam argument kind of blends into that. Yeah, like we're saying here, because you're rational to believe that's, because I had said to you, how come, I said, Jason, between you and I, how come you won't make a claim? Why are, because you had said something along the lines of, this is what we heard. I'm not saying that it was a ghost. I'm not even saying that this is evidence for a ghost. And so I said to you, why don't you feel that that it's evidence? Because from the way I see it is you're out there because there's claims that there's something going on at that house, right? You've eliminated as much possible. You've set the stage so that it's not set the stage in the sense of like to get what you're looking for in a confirmation bias kind of way. But you made sure that you did a careful analysis when you went in there. You made sure you did your best to make sure nobody else was in the building. You guys were just a careful approach to what you were looking for. You're hoping to maybe find if there's anything there. So I think that it's rational for you to think that maybe there is something there, that maybe there is something that's spiritual there. You don't have a better explanation, and you're not doing a God of the gaps argument. You're not doing a ghost of the gaps argument. You're just doing you're making and you're not even making so much a claim, but I think you'd be okay making a claim. I think you'd be okay saying, I think there might be a ghost there. Here's the evidence of what we have. I'm not being definitive, but there may be paranormal activity here. To the best of our knowledge, this is unexplainable. If I were to lean towards something, maybe it's paranormal. Most I because you don't want to just be so much foot on your you don't want to be so much in the clouds that you're not rational, but you don't want to be so rational that you're not open to anything. You know what I'm saying? When the evidence presents itself, because then you're having confirmation bias towards naturalism completely, and you don't want to look at anything because but it does take courage at times to say, and when I say courage, I'm saying sometimes it's okay to just say, I think there was a ghost there. But when we do that, it does open us up to a little bit of ridicule. Some people think we're kooks, but I think there's rational, you're rational to believe that there was something there, and it most likely was paranormal. And I think that's how we got talking on that, because when I was talking about the Kalam, it kind of gives a logical framework for you to accept those things. And it's okay to say, yeah, I think God exists. Yeah, I think that ghosts exist. I think that, the paranormal exists, and there's some evidences. It's not blind faith. I would not accuse you of blind faith. If I watched that video, I wouldn't say you were using blind faith. I would say that you're using every careful approach that you could possibly do and try to eliminate as much bias and interruption as possible. And that's a careful approach to the subject. And, it's not blind faith. So if you see something and you wanted to come to a conclusion that maybe, maybe that was a ghost, then I think you'd be rational to accept that.
Yeah, and that's why I presented it. I've been doing this since 2006, and that's, we're 36 episodes in, and that's the only quote unquote evidence that I've presented. Mainly because, like, as you said, setting the stage, and it's not setting the stage to get what you want. It's a controlled environment. You're sort of saying, okay, everyone in the building is sitting in this one place, so there's no one else in the building. We've locked all the doors, so no one else can come in. We searched the building before we sat down to do the investigation. So we're eliminating, it's a scientific experiment. You're trying to get a controlled environment. And this is why experiments are done in labs, because you can control the parameters of your experiment. And you can say, well, we're only using this type of mouse, and we're using this same exact maze every single time, and it's the same time of day. And you're trying to have controls in your experiment. And so, yeah, to hear that, to capture that, and you really made me rethink things with the Kalam, because at the time I was telling you, like, I refuse to call it evidence, I refuse to call it proof, and you were like, well, why not call it evidence? It's not proof, but it is a piece of the puzzle. It is a piece of evidence, because you've eliminated, it's not another person, it wasn't an animal, it wasn't the house settling. You've eliminated certain explanations that would normally account for this. So now you have to go to the Kalam and sort of say, well, something created this. Why is it so strange to think that maybe it was a ghost? And that's how we kind of got on the Kalam,
Right.
because
Yeah.
you're not saying it was a ghost, but you're just saying it opens the door to the possibility of it being a ghost. So therefore,
Irrational.
It can be irrational, because you've eliminated
Logical.
other things. So what is left? And that doesn't mean it definitely was a ghost. It could be like what we were saying about God. Like, we have an idea of what God is, but we could be completely wrong. It could be It could be pure energy. It doesn't have to be a being. It doesn't have to be some guy sitting up in the clouds or whatever, we've imagined God to be. It could be something that we just totally don't understand. And same thing with ghosts. They could be something, we attribute them to, it's the spirit of a dead person, or whatever we try to come up with to explain them, but it could be something that we just have no idea about, we can't explain. So we're using the term ghost or paranormal, because what caused the footsteps? Something was clearly stepping on those stairs and there was nobody there. So what was applying the pressure to make that sound? Something created that. So you have to sort of follow that logic back and say, it wasn't a person, it wasn't this. You eliminate the usual suspects, and what are you left with? You're left with,
Yeah.
it opens the possibility to a ghost.
You know, and this kind of this kind of brings up the subject of you know, when we apply the scientific method, right, it's limited, you know. So from my view, the scientific method is a great tool that we can use and we should use to try to explain the world around us. But it's not. I don't like to get caught in the trap of like scientism, like science explains everything, because there's demonstrable things that science can't explain. And I mentioned this once. I don't remember. I don't know if it was in the Exorcist podcast. It was one of those podcasts I had mentioned it. But for example, science can't explain math, right? Science can't explain the existence of math, but science has to assume math. Try doing physics or chemistry without math. But we can't explain why math exists, but we're rational to believe it exists because there it is. Right. It's a concept. It works. It's something very profound. But science can't explain math. So if we try to say science explains everything and it's sufficient for everything we see in the natural world, well, no, it isn't. It's limited. So we have to be careful not to put so much of a confirmation bias that science will, science can explain everything in the universe. It cannot. You look at like aesthetic judgments, like beauty. Beauty is something that is pretty much a universal experience. We see something, we see the mountains, we see the Adirondacks, we see a beautiful canyon, we see a beautiful sunset, or we see a beautiful picture, or a beautiful woman, or whatever it could be, whatever it is. And you recognize beauty when you see it. And it is something that's subjective to a lot of us, but a lot of us have a common experience of recognizing beauty when we see it. Science cannot explain that. That is something that is outside the realm of science to explain. But yet we're rational to believe it. Morality is something that can't be sufficiently explained by science. Morality, from a scientific framework, is generally explained through a social contract, right? We make a social contract to agree to be nice to each other, but that's really just a contract. That's really just a construct, and we can break that contract anytime we want. So it's not really binding. So morality is hard to explain, right? Why is murdering babies, or why is murdering an old lady always bad? You know what I'm saying? Most of us would say it was always bad. There's some things that we would agree with that we would think that are just bad, that no matter what, the ebb and flow of pop culture, public opinion, or no matter who's in power, who's not in power, there's some things that we can say are just bad. You know
Right.
what I mean? So, and science can't explain those types of moral judgments, but we're rational to believe that they exist, and it's okay. We can take those leaps of faith, and they're not leaps of blind faith, they're leaps of rational faith. Reasonable faith. So I think we all operate in a framework of faith, whether we want to admit it or not, or whether we understand that it's actually happening. Like when you're sleeping at night, you're sleeping in the bed, it's pitch black, but you got to get up and go to the bathroom. You put your foot down, believing that there's going to be a floor to support your weight. And you start walking in complete blindness, you start walking, but you're rational to believe there's a floor there because you've seen the floor there many, many times. And even though it's dark, you can still walk on the floor. So we live with faith quite a bit. We don't even realize we're doing it, but it's happening as we're getting up to go to the bathroom at night, and we do it all the time. I know I do it a couple times at night. So
Yeah.
I know we all operate in a realm of faith, and it's not just blind faith; it's a rational, reasonable faith. But yeah, I wanted to make that comment on science, because science isn't all sufficient. And so I just think people need to be careful of that. And when we use research methods, for example, the research methods we use in science are a little bit different from the research methods in investigating the paranormal. Some would say that they're pseudoscience. So Jason, what would you say about somebody saying that, okay, the methods, like if you use a meter or something like that, or you use a stick or, a wand or something to detect something, like how would you respond to someone saying that that's pseudoscience, that that's not really science?
Basically how I explain it to people is there's a couple of ways. One of them, we use our meters generally to debunk things. I think I've shared this on the show before too, that we've had cases where people have like an old alarm clock, their mother dies or their father dies, and they give them this alarm clock, and it's one of these like little flip ones, where the digits kind of flip over, and it's from the 70s or whatever, and they have it right on their nightstand, and they sleep right next to and then you go over with the meter to the alarm clock, and it spikes the meter, just off the charts. And we tell them, like, move your alarm clock. This thing is from the 70s. The wiring is not shielded. You're getting bombarded all night with like electromagnetic fields. And then they move the alarm clock, and guess what? Like, within days, like, the ghosts go away. There's no more ghosts. They're not hearing anything. They're not seeing anything. So we're debunking in that sense. So that's the main purpose that we personally use those meters and electronics for. A lot of groups will go out there and, oh my God, it's spiking, and that's a ghost, and they talk to it. And the theory behind that is, and I do kind of subscribe to the theory that, energy cannot be destroyed. So if a soul passes, and we are energy, we're electric energy, where does that energy go when we die? If ghosts exist, if they're moving things, if they're speaking to us, if they're making sounds, they're expending energy. So if you have a meter that can pick up energy, and something gets knocked off of a shelf, and at the same time your meter is going off, that can be a correlation to sort of say that this ghost used energy to move this object, and that's the energy you were picking up. And that's the scientific sort of explanation there. And again, a lot of groups don't go by that. They go out and buy a K2 meter, and they talk to it, and and I'm not shitting on that. I mean, that it's as good a method as any other. We're kind of in the dark ages here, and that's where all science comes from. It's what'll happen if I put this chemical in here and light it on fire? It might make a nice little blue flame, or it could blow a crater in your town, and you don't know until you do it. So that's kind of where science starts, is like just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what's going to stick. So I don't, I'm trying not to, disparage that method. I think it's a good method if you're using other methods. I think, if that's your sole method, if you're just kind of talking to an EMF detector and that's all you're doing, you're kind of limiting your scope of what you can find. So we kind of run the gamut where we really try to debunk things first. Is it a pseudoscience? It can be. And I think, a lot of the TV shows and just, and there's a lot of good paranormal groups out there, so I don't want to lump everybody into this, but there's also a lot of bad paranormal groups out there who do this for fun. They bring pizza and soda, and they're all laughing all night, and they're just trying to scare themselves. They're kids, they're, or just people who are bored. But there's other people who do take it more seriously and do try to take that more serious approach. But they're the ones who aren't getting on TV. They're the ones whose YouTube channels are not getting the hits, because it's boring. It's boring to kind of swing and miss week after week after week, because that's science.
Just like the Bigfoot shows, it's just like Finding Bigfoot or Expedition Bigfoot. People don't want to see the boring, them sitting there for days. You know what I mean? Just trying to find a broken stick, a broken branch, some kind of footprint, some kind of vocalization, maybe a hair sample. If they don't find something within, then people don't want to see that. They want to see action. They want to find out that it just opened a portal and walked through. And that's how they're disappearing. They don't have, in an hour episode, they don't want to take the time to, why haven't we found any of these things? Because it's easier just to say they opened a portal and walked away. Like you said, boring doesn't sell TV. That the hard, boring research. Same thing with Bigfoot. There's a lot of good folk out there doing stuff, and they're not getting paid a nickel to do it. They're actually draining their bank accounts because it's their passion. and they're never going to get a moment of notoriety for it because they're not giving the people what they want. It's it's entertainment is what people want. They don't really, not the majority of people. I shouldn't say that. I mean, obviously the more spectacular ghost stories, the scary, really spooky, like you said, stuff flying off the shelves, or the Bigfoot, you know what I mean, which is outside the house, banging on the house, breaking windows, and that that's what people want to see. They don't want to just see how someone's been in the woods for 2 weeks and they might have got a fleeting glimpse of something, or someone's been you know um, researching a possible haunted location, and they've been there for a long time, and they might have got 15 seconds of unexplained footsteps. That's the majority of that's entertainment. You know what I mean? And just like you said, unfortunately, there's a lot of good people out there doing a lot of good work that's never going to get the notoriety that they deserve.
Yeah, and that's just what makes me sad, because like I said, we like to criticize the groups, or we like to criticize the TV shows, and it's really because they're just showing a very sensationalized view of what's going on. But there's plenty of groups out there, like I said, who their YouTube channels are not going to get the hits because their shows every week are like, yeah, we went in and we found nothing. And then we went to this place and we found nothing. We went to this place
Right.
and we found nothing. That's not what people want to see. And, uh, you know, I've heard this from other groups. I've heard this from Seth Breedlove. I mean, he was saying, a lot of the negative reviews he gets on his movies are like, well, you didn't show any new evidence. You didn't show any proof. You didn't, and he's like,
You're
I'm
not
just
always
telling
going
the
to get it.
stories, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I'm not here to entertain you and to sensationalize this. I'm showing you what we found. If we didn't find anything, we didn't find anything. Go watch the Travel Channel, go watch,
Expedition Bigfoot. Yeah,
Expedition
there you go.
Bigfoot, or go watch, Ghost Adventures, because they find something every week, and
Yeah.
it's totally not true. But if that's what entertains you, that's fine. But yeah, the people doing the real science, the real research, they're not getting the YouTube clicks, they're not getting the website clicks, they're not getting TV shows, and like you said, Scott, they're just not getting the recognition. They're out there, they're spending
Right.
every dime, they're doing things totally right, and they're sticking true to their values and the values they should be sticking to. But no one's ever going to hear from them. No one's ever going to buy their books, because they're not going on YouTube and like, oh my God, look, the EMF meter went off, and they're editing it to look sensational, and like they're taking that 8-hour investigation and condensing it down into 40 minutes, and they're showing you the highlights, which is exciting and entertaining, but it's not science, it's not truth, it's not logic. It's just what they want you to see. And give us the clicks, and we're going to go on TikTok and dance, and we're going to show you on a loop the evidence we caught. And it's just funny, and I've shown stuff I've been doing like YouTube shorts, and it's just basic stuff. It's like, oh, me walking through this place that looks creepy, and people are, I'm getting thumbs down on it. And I'm like, why? Like, it's a completely non-offensive video. I'm not claiming there's a ghost here, but people are probably coming across it and being like, oh, I wanted to see a ghost and there's no ghost here, so thumbs down.
Right. Yeah, you're not giving the people what they want.
I'm not feeding into their belief that
That's right.
Like,
There
this place is definitely haunted. Oh, look, I saw a shadow in the woods. That must be a ghost, or that's a witch, or that's Bigfoot, or that's an alien running away. And I'm not making those claims, so thumbs down. I don't like this video because I want to see ghosts. I want everything I see has to show a ghost, or has to have somebody running and screaming, and what the fuck was that? Let's run away, or let's go chase it, or and it's not like that in reality.
I think that you're right. I think that, and we've mentioned this before on another podcast as well, but we are interested in truth. I think at the end of the day, we all want to know what truth is, whether it's on a particular topic, depending on which topic it is. We want to know the truth about something. Nobody wants to be, well, some people don't mind if they're lied to. Some people want to be sold a fantasy. Some people, maybe it's a form of escapism or something. I don't know. Some people are okay with fantasies. Some people are okay with like kind of a sloppy, lazy approach at determining truth. And sometimes you might not even get to the truth, but the closer you get to it, it's worth it. It's worth it doing that journey. It's worth it taking the time to do it, even if it takes 50 to 70 years of research, or maybe if you're building on the backs of giants. There's a saying that if I see farther than someone else, it's because I'm standing on the shoulders of giants.
Who came before you? Yeah.
Yeah, those who came before us. So I mean, some of the things that were just kind of on the cusp of, you know, 200 years later, we're coming to the realization of it. We're like, yes, we're so smart. Well, no, because you couldn't get, you have a foundation on someone else. And I think having a careful approach to truth, whether it be about Bigfoot, the paranormal, religion, whatever you want to call it, it does involve just taking your time, not being gullible, not being foolish. If you were foolish and gullible, believing something, just you know, let it go and move on with something else. Deal with your emotions. You got to be okay with sometimes having, your belief shattered. It sucks, but I am telling you from someone who's had it happen to me many times that it's worth the journey. It's worth the effort, and to be careful and just do better next time. Keep looking for the truth, keep pursuing it, and be honest. Patience is a virtue. Truth is a virtue. Science won't speak on those things, but I will.
That's well said. And I guess maybe to put a closing note on everything, and maybe just pick up briefly where our last few episodes back, with the Sasquatch Chronicles investigation there on that wasn't any. This show doesn't express our views, okay, or our thoughts on Wes Sasquatch Chronicles, what he's done or anything. We've stated several times, loved his stuff. Okay, I was a subscriber to him in the very beginning, when the fledgling show was just starting. I loved the fact because it was Sasquatch Chronicles, and it wasn't just paranormal. Everything jumbled into one. You didn't have ghosts one week, unexplained events the next week. It was cutting edge. It was Sasquatch Chronicles, or Bigfoot Hotspot Radio as it started. And I thought that was so wonderful. For me, it was like, finally. I mean, I enjoy all the other unexplained stuff, but as far as that, it was groundbreaking, because this is all it is. It's just Bigfoot. All right. And that just made me happy. It was something that I really enjoyed. Then the controversy came out. And to be 100% honest with you, when that all happened, I didn't say, that's it, I'm done with him. I didn't even form an opinion. In all true fairness, I could have cared less if he's seen a Sasquatch, 10 of them, 5 of them. Well, that didn't matter to me. I loved his content of the show. I loved how he was doing it. I loved the fact that he was bringing people on the show that could, tell them about their encounters. People could get stories off their chest that weren't going to get ridiculed time and time again, because it was he was groundbreaking, and still is. I mean, we're not trying to take anything away from Wes, and thanks to God, these people who've been commenting don't know where we live, because we'd have our houses egged. And I mean, the passion of these people to follow him, as passionately as they are, that I guess that's fine, but we're not it's not our views. It's not our thoughts. We're not trying to discredit him. Like I said, speaking again, and I'll just speak for myself, being a member of that show for a lot of years. When that came out, I didn't care. That didn't sway my thoughts on Sasquatch Chronicles one bit. I was sad to see Will Jevning and Shannon go, yes, because I thought, man, with the 3 of them, they were getting to the point where it was really good stuff. Really good stuff. I was sad to see Shannon and Will go their ways, but it didn't. That wasn't why I end up unsubscribing. I unsubscribed because what got me to like him purposefully in the beginning was Sasquatch Chronicles. Now, all the other extracurricular stuff that's coming in. You can't have an episode without balls of light. You can't have the paranormal aspect without it. You just, again, that's almost like the boring old Bigfoot stories aren't exciting enough anymore. You have to have the spectacular. It has to be over the top. It just can't be if this guy just had a road crossing, split second, well, nobody cares about that, because that's a dime a dozen. If the Bigfoot opened the portal and walked through it, there you go. That's going to get some hits. that, that was the reason I unsubscribed for it. And that's my personal belief. That was my personal taste only. That was, I never would say Wes sucks. I never, because what he did, man, was really groundbreaking. Obviously, you get to where he is today, you've done something right. And obviously the guy's done something right. I've never met him, never talked to him. He seems like a 100% class act guy. There's no reason to doubt his character. I don't care if his story, his sighting is true or not. To me, that is 100% didn't matter to me. I wasn't going to get, drop him or unsubscribe from his show because of that. And I didn't. So we're not trying to discredit him. Never once did we say anything bad, try to take anything away from him. Just trying to let that, put that out there first. We're not here to try and take down Wes Gerber. Unfortunately, if that's how it came across, I'll apologize myself, because that's not 100% not what our intention was. Just bringing out facts that was already brought about by other people other than us. Don't shoot the messenger. We didn't. And because we brought that up doesn't mean we're trying to do any harm to him. It's the last thing in the world we want to do. But like I said, was my reasons for unsubscribing and losing interest. Wasn't because of his story, whether it was true or not, because I could have cared less, still could care less. I don't think any different from him if he made the story up or if it was God's honest truth. He's got our respect. You don't have to send hate mail and everything, because we're not trying to be disrespectful at all, because we have nothing but 100% respect for the guy and for what he's accomplished and continues to accomplish. It's just not what I originally enjoyed Sasquatch Chronicles for. Was, just no nonsense, talk about Bigfoot encounters without the spectacular side effects that apparently now is what comes with everything.
Yeah, so, we were just, our whole analysis was there to proceed from a point of logic. Which is the whole point of this show tonight, is just, we heard a story, and it's a famous story. So of course we're going to talk, this isn't just anybody's story, and everybody I've had on the show, I've asked them questions. I question them. I don't just, of course I let them tell their story, but I also ask, what did you do? Did you go out and look? Did you try to do this? Did you see this? Stories need to be questioned, especially extraordinary stories. And it doesn't matter if it's some guy who went to high school with, or, like some guy who has the biggest podcast in the world. Right. They are all subject to scrutiny. And I think, and these are just our opinions, we're not trying to discredit anyone. This is just, we're, our thoughts, our opinions. And yeah, like if you don't like the show anymore, Scott, because he's going to broader subjects, and that's just like the TV shows are doing, they need to be entertaining. And I have so many people who I've asked to come on this show who've basically just said, my story isn't that good. It's I'd be on for like 5 minutes. Christy, hi, I know I've tried to get her on because she's got a couple of stories, but she's like, I'd be on for 5 minutes and then we'd have nothing else to talk about.
Right.
So I think, a lot of podcasts are going to, try to get people on with more sensational stories, or TV shows, they're not going to be interested in the fleeting road crossing. They're going to want, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then 3 weeks later I went back out and I saw the Bigfoot and his whole family, and then 2 weeks later, I saw a UFO hovering, and the Bigfoot were waving to them and they were having a picnic. And the shorter stories, the fleeting stories don't really carry that gravitas. It's not really going to bring in the viewers, so you got to kind of pump that up and expand, and that's fine. And we weren't attacking anyone. We were just sort of, again, we heard a story that had logical flaws, provable factual inaccuracies, and we were just simply pointing them out. We weren't passing judgment. We were just sort of saying, you have a premise, you have a second premise. One of those premises was completely wrong. So the conclusion now is on shaky ground. I'm not saying he was lying. I'm not saying, maybe there's another explanation for it, but Josh's whole presentation tonight was these columns have to sort of hold up your premise. And if the columns are false, the conclusion is most likely false. And if the premises are true, then the conclusion is most likely true. We're not talking about proof here. We're not talking about 100%. We're talking about probabilities, plausibilities. possibilities. So that's all we were saying. That's all we're saying tonight, is just when you're dealing with the paranormal, deal in plausibility, try not to be the blind faith person. If you want to believe in something, that's great, but take a look at it. And it doesn't mean you have to hate the person who told the story that doesn't make sense. Or if again, we've all had crises of faith. We've all had things that have shaken us to our bone, where we have to rethink our lives, especially guys like us in our, mid, late 40s, early 50s. We've been there. We've done that.
Well, if you go back, and with that being said, who was your very first episode? I mean, kind of like, it was kind of hard to go up after your very first episode with Seth, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so you had Seth Breedlove as your episode number 1 groundbreaker. You grilled him pretty good, all right? You did. And he answered every question, and he's a pretty popular figure nowadays, and we didn't get a whole lot of hate mail from him, or his fans, maybe because, I guess maybe if people want to go back and watch episode 1, but Seth Breedlove, sat there and answered every question, and it wasn't scripted, it was off the cuff, and you could take, take it from him how it was. He answered every question, and it wasn't sugar coated. You didn't cherry pick, and I kind of felt that last episode was, kind of directed like the same way, even though Wes wasn't on here. I don't feel we were attacking him behind his back without, representation or anything like that. Maybe you could get him to come on, and I'm sure the character he has, he'd probably come on and talk to you for an hour and explain what that was all about, and not send. Last thing he'd probably want was his posse coming out to egg our house because he thought we were trying to take him down, when in fact that was 100% not the case. But
no, but again, it's all in good faith here. We're all, at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. We may all come at it from different positions and viewpoints and opinions, but we're all here just to kind of get to the truth. And,
right.
We all may believe different things about what ghosts are, what UFOs are, what Bigfoot is, but we're all here to be on the same page, to be on the same team. And that's, what we have to remember. And to be honest, a lot of the people who left negative comments on that video and I responded to them, they came back and thanked me for thank you for clarifying, or thank you for having a discussion.
I've seen that for quite a few of them, because a lot of them even said, they just maybe listened to the point up to where you had read the accusations and shut it off, didn't even watch the rest of the video, so they didn't get to see the whole thing to find out that that's not what it was about. And then when you explained it to them, I've seen that myself. There's quite a few that came back and says, now that you say it that way, you're right.
Right. And that's, we understand that people are going to be defensive of their positions. And, I never want to attack anybody. That's not what this show is about. The show is non-judgmental. It's if we are picking something apart, we're doing it logically, not when, we didn't sit there. We weren't laughing and joking and, this guy's an idiot. We were just
no disrespect.
There was no disrespect. And honestly, there were certain things in that report that seemed to be attacking him that we were like, no, this is perfectly normal for Wes to do. So we were defending him as well. But a lot of those people, like you said, either didn't watch that far, or they didn't, their ears were pricked up because they were so focused on the criticisms, they weren't listening to the defense of Wes, which we were also doing.
We weren't headhunting by any chance.
Right. We were sort of picking that report apart and saying, okay, yeah, this is kind of damning, but this stuff shouldn't have even been in the report because this is natural. Of course he's going to try to protect himself with an LLC. Of course he's going to try to, have a holding company. He's got millions of followers. He's got money invested in this. So
being a good businessman doesn't make you a bad person.
Exactly. So that's all we were saying. So
yeah,
that's a good way to kind of wrap this up and just sort of say, logic, always use logic. And Josh, thank you so much for that presentation. Cause that
was awesome.
That whole thing really just wraps both sides of the paranormal spectrum, just the blind believers and the total skeptics and logical people who are just trying to constantly, the science believers, like you said, of just both ends of that spectrum, come meet in the middle. That there's a logic here where, you don't have to say that this is definitely a ghost or this is definitely Bigfoot, but it just opens the door to say, okay, there's enough people seeing this, there's enough people reporting this, there's enough evidence to look into this, not to prove it, but to say there's enough evidence here where the mainstream scientific community should be looking at these things because enough evidence is out there, whether that's stories, whether that's footprints, whether that's photographs or video or whatever it is, there's enough out there to investigate it. And that's where we have to kind of come is just get that logic, just meet in that middle and say, this is my belief, but here's the logic that I'm using to get there. And not just sort of saying, yeah, I believe in Bigfoot just because, my dad's friend's cousin saw one, or, I watched Finding Bigfoot, or I believe Zach Baggins. Why do you believe Zach Baggins? Or Bagans, I don't know how to say his name, but
don't start that. Yeah.
But why do you believe him?
I get it.
Give the evidentiary support for why you believe this, and then we can start moving forward. But if you have these blind believers, if you have these skeptics who just throw everything out because scientifically you can't prove it, you're not kind of getting to that middle ground where you can say, okay, there's a plausibility here that we need to investigate.
Exactly.
So, Josh, thank you so much. I mean, that was awesome that you wrote all that up and did the diagrams and you presented that really well. So, thank you.
That was awesome. That was great, brother. I was
losing
great.
myself halfway through.
And you didn't blow my mind like you thought you would. I got it.
I thought it was just going to go right over your head, Scott.
Oh man, I thought, geez, give me a little.
I should have accomplished it. Yeah. I thought if I could, I'll be successful if I can at least get Scott to understand some of it at the end. And yeah,
you really think of me as Fred Flintstone, is what you're saying?
No. But yeah,
maybe a little.
Yeah, a little suspicious. It might be a little, a little tough. But yeah, hopefully I tried to make it as less complex. But sometimes some things are.
And Josh, if you can send those to me, I'll put them up on our website. So if anybody wants to look them over again, because I mean they can rewind the video here, but if you're okay sharing those documents, I'd love to make them available for people just to kind of see, because I think if people have made it this far and they've stuck with us this far, and now we're in almost 40 minutes into this episode, I think they'll want to read into it, because it's fascinating and it kind of blew my mind. It's something as an investigator I've never heard of before, but it makes so much sense. And again, it doesn't prove anything, it doesn't confirm anything, but it
gives you something to think about.
It's a different way of thinking about things. And instead of just blindly believing or blindly discounting things, it makes both sides of the aisles, not just believers. It's also the fact-based people who are just very staunch in their disbelief. To sort of open their minds and say, because you made me change my mind on the evidence thing, because I'm like, it's a sound, I'm not going to call it evidence, and you sort of made me rethink that. So thank you for that. And the presentation was great. And yeah, so thank you guys for joining me tonight. I think we're going to wrap it up here because getting a little late here. Anything else you guys wanted to add before we?
No, that was good. That was a great show. Thank you, Josh. Excellent work.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. All right, guys. So thanks again. I'm going to see you guys this
Friday, Saturday.
Yeah. Well, this will be airing on Tuesday, so I'll already have seen you guys in person for the Bigfoot convention. I think we're going to see Steve Culls and Kenny Irish up there in Rotterdam. But I'm hoping to get some footage this weekend of that and Beardsley Castle, and I'll maybe do a little bonus episode on that. But we're recording this before I come up to see you guys, but anybody listening to this, it's going to be after I saw you guys. So cool. But I'm looking forward to seeing you guys this weekend.
Yes, sir.
And we'll have a great time. But thanks again for coming on the show.
Thank you.
And great discussion as always. And yeah, we could go on forever and hours and hours and hours, but we'll end it there for tonight. All right, guys.
Thanks, fellas. Have a good night.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Josh. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
All right. I want to thank Josh and Scott for coming on once again, guest hosting with me. Went a little bit down the rabbit hole tonight, but I think a really good conversation about using logic as far as dealing with the paranormal, the spiritual, the unknown. Just remember to always use logic, everybody. Just, have our, bases for your arguments, and we'll all be good. We're all on the same team here. We all just want answers, and logic is the way to go. Some shout outs, Rebecca, Christy, I already gave you a shout out, so I'm giving you another one here. Lori, all the new followers that we have on YouTube here. I really appreciate it. We're really starting to chug along here. I got a bunch of new subscribers in the past week or so. So thank you everybody for watching and subscribing and commenting. I love the comments. I love interacting with everybody on YouTube. Follow us on Facebook. There's links down below. So follow us there. Until next week, everybody, rock and roll.
Moonlight glowing, it fades on me and you, casting dancing shadows. The earth is draped in blue. Here in this moment, time is standing still.